Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to make a quick video on DPS for that basically heavy holy gear paladin video that I made recently. So the paladin in the video is an Argent Defender base. Let me actually make the Argent Defender base here real quick. 3 points there, 2 points, 1, 5, 2, 1, and blah. So this is typically the Argent Defender base that I'm going with currently. So whenever you hear me talk about an Argent Defender Paladin, it's basically going to have these features, right? And then the question is, what do you do with like the remaining 21 points? You either put the rest of the points down into, let's see, 1, 2, 3, and you can either come down here and spend most of your points picking up Pursuit of Justice, and then coming over here and picking up, putting the rest of the points in Spiritual Focus. That way, with improved concentration aura, you got like a 92% pushback immunity. Or what you do is you strip all the points out of Retribution and you try putting them into the Holy Tree. You're able to get down here and pick up a Divine Favor for a little benefits of that. I don't really like this too terribly much, but it might work. I haven't tested, played around with it too terribly much. Basically because these paladins are designed to, your primary judgment on the target is going to be Judgment of Justice. And having Judgment of Justice as your primary judgment and Pursuit of Justice is really good. There are going to be times, of course, when you don't need both Judgment of Justice and Pursuit of Justice. In that case, you can judge Judgment of the Crusader and pick up a bunch more spell power. But there's something to be said about picking up, 12% increased healing, illumination, and then the tempo effects of Divine Favor. So feel free to look into that. But anyways, the math that we're going to be talking about today is centered around this Argent Defender Paladin right here. So basically, when you're in healing gear, in the previous video I talked about how you have these stats. Close to 150 MP5, 700-ish spell power, 1700 plus healing, and then this is the math centered around what the plus healing actually looks like. This is just a note over here that there's a weapon that exists that will increase your healing by 200 if you're below 50% health. Not factored in these calculations, obviously. So basically, the short version of the previous video that I made was that, as you can see here, and this is probably some private server bullshit, but Holy Light, whether we downrank it or not, whether we have a lot of spell power or not, has absolutely garbage MPH, mana per heal ratios. Like it's mana inefficient as a motherfucker, and it's also technically it's an HPS efficiency, like healing per second efficiency, but MPH is really bad. So what typically happens if you don't have plus healing gear on your paladins, even if you're going with like spell damage and plus healing, is you run out of mana and then you die. Like that's literally, like you can out heal the incoming damage, but eventually you're just going to run out of mana and you're going to fucking die. And the reason for that is because even with this heavy plus healing set and Blessing of Light, right, on top of me, these MPH ratios are dog shit. Meanwhile, mages and everything else are throwing mana per damage point ratios of you at like 6 to 1, which is why you just eventually run out of mana and you fucking die. So to combat this, what you eventually have to do is you have to get enough plus healing gear that it brings your FOLs online. So now suddenly your FOLs are actually healing HPS-wise very similarly to your HOLs, or very viably compared to your HOLs, right? You don't want to get the point, right? Your FOLs become viable to heal with under PvP conditions rather than your HOLs, and then the mana inefficiency, or the mana efficiency that comes from that allows you to start doing other things like you don't have to take as much MP5, you can start actually playing the endurance game, so forth and so on. And it's just your best option. But what I want to showcase for you today in a bit more detail is, what does your DPS look like when you're a paladin attempting to go PvP in like pure plus healing gear? Like, what the fuck, man? Your DPS must suck a dick. And the answer is no. Not at all. So I got the raw stats over here. So this paladin over here is basically the Argent Defender Paladin that we showed with these baseline stats with a plus healing weapon. And this is what happens when you switch from like a plus healing weapon, like you kind of worn your opponent down on their resources a bit. to now you're going to go into a bit more offensive mode. So this is like, okay, a one-handed weapon with a bunch more spell power. You can see we gain a little bit of spell power switching the weapon. And possibly the shield, and then this is a one-hander with it's just doing more physical damage than spell power, and this is our two-handed with spell power. In that video, of course, I also showcased the ratios. We showcase why going from a one-hander to a two-hander actually is kind of better for some messed up reason, because it actually has a higher spell power ratio, and you gain a metric shit ton of bonus physical damage on top of that. And you can kind of see that going on over here. Like the two-handed weapons at 3.5 speed are actually hitting like a fucking truck. And then you compare it to like the one-hander with a metric shit ton of more spell power. And the SOR, if you crunch the numbers, the SOR doesn't actually do that much more damage. And the reason for that, despite the massive spell power increase, and of course the reason for that is because the two-hander just has a better spell power ratio. Right? It's like it's got 30% more spell power ratio on the two-hander SOR. Despite the fact that, let me think, yeah, so this is almost a 60% spell power increase between these two, but it doesn't really matter all that much because this thing is operating on a 30% increased spell power ratio. And it just happens to even out, kind of a thing. It just ends up being weird. So the mathematical damage that I calculated for us with this particular Paladin build in this particular gear is primarily going to be centered around using the two-hander. Even though it might technically be, in some cases, you're better off using like a one-hander, especially like a slower physical-based damage one-hander, or you might be the fast spell power. But you'll see why this is. So the way I see it, there's going to be basically two situations for you DPS-wise. You're either going to be in a stop-start type DPS environment, or you're going to be in a sustained time-on-target type DPS environment. So stop-start, what that's going to look like is against rogues, you're going to be very stop-start with your DPS against rogues. Against hunters, you might be very stop-start. Against druids, you might be very stop-start. Maybe not, because you've got Pursuit of Justice, and your primary judgment is going to be Judgment of Justice as well, so maybe that'll make it not so stop-start. But, you know, Druids still have Cyclone, right? So that automatically is probably going to make things very stop-start. Stop-start meaning that you're only going to have very small DPS windows until they hit you with some CC, and then you have to re-catch the target, and then you can DPS on them again. Mage is going to be very stop-start. Warlock might be a little bit stop-start, but you probably have a longer DPS window against them. Yeah, and then the sustain time on target stuff, that is classes where you're going to get really good sustained time on target would be like against warriors, against any type of priests. They can't get you off of you too terribly well. Possibly other paladins. But more importantly, the sustained time on target stuff is you've kind of geared with your trinkets and so forth and so on, and your specialist items and you've worn down your opponent's options to get you the fuck off of them, that you're able to generate a much longer time on target style window. So this time on target, this TOT is like 30 seconds of TOT. So again, what does our DPS look like? So this assumes that we only have an 8-second DPS window. This is an idealistic DPS window because it allows us to get off an extra melee attack, obviously, and it lets us get out 2 judgments in this amount of time, right? Like 8-second cooldown on your judgment. So a lot of the DPS here is coming from the front-loaded nature of our attacks. So that our judgment damage is front-loaded. Our two-handed melee swing, our first one, is front-loaded. And we're able to generate about 560 DPS given a twist or two, basically right here. This math does not include critical strike chance on any of the abilities, and the reason why I never include critical strike chance in my math on anything is because I also don't include, like, you know, dodge chance on the enemy, parry chance on the enemy, all that crap. I just give all that numbers over to the RNG and just try to get a rough estimate of how much DPS we're pumping. All right, so that's not half bad, honestly, for a heavy plus healing gear paladin that really can wear on the enemy and cannot be killed for being stop-start DPS-wise. DPS option number 2 is when we're sustained time on target. You can see our DPS spikes rather considerably to about 633. There's a lot of disingenuousness here as well in a lot of ways. So we're kind of assuming you have SOR stacked up 5 times for the entirety of the 30 seconds. But we're also not, so I was like, okay, maybe it's up half the time, maybe it's not up half the time. I also didn't factor in too much twisting going on during this amount of time, even though in theory you could twist a lot. Just maintaining the TOT is more important than getting every auto attack twisted, obviously. So I think I factored in about half your auto attacks being twisted, which seems reasonable to me. But you can still see that despite the fact that we're in heavy plus healing gear, we're still maintaining like a metric shit ton of DPS. And this DPS can technically be ramped up even further if we were able to sustain 5 out of 5 if we already had 5 out of 5 vengeance on the target before we even pulled the trigger on our 30 seconds of TOT. Yeah, no, these damage numbers are looking pretty good, especially since you have to remember that our number one DPS increaser is our healing efficiency and our inability to fucking die. And the reason why that's a massive DPS increaser in classic TBC is because not a lot of classes have very good sustain in classic TBT. It's not like classic World of Warcraft where just about any class and its dog can CC us and then fuck off for a metric shit ton of time and then like eat and drink their way to victory, right? They can't break off from us as well as they could in classic TBC and get the eating and drinking sustain in there, which means that they actually have pretty serious sustain issues in classic TBC. The other thing making their sustain issues a little bit more untenable is that the meta's a lot less bursty, so it's like everybody's HP in TBC is doubled, but their DPS is only increased by like 30% or 40% or something like that. So it takes a lot more of their initial starting mana bar to actually threaten a paladin with death. And if you're able to if you're able to outlast that, then they're in a pretty bad and awkward situation. The only thing I don't like about these builds, and this is not a ununique build to the Paladin class in general, is classic TBC meta in general. Just about every class can CC you and then run, do nothing but run in the other direction. Drop combat, mount up, and fly away. Or they can CC you, drop combat, and then start eating and drinking. And if you do anything as the Paladin but sit down and eat and drink yourself, you're probably going to lose that duel from a sustain perspective, right? Because you can't stop them from eating and drinking. So if you try, like with a grenade or something like that, you're just going to lose that fight eventually. They're just going to kite you into oblivion. A key note in Paladin PvP is that you're supposed to punish people trying to use this massive weakness against you of you being a Paladin by taking this time to customize your gear. So, for example, when I'm dueling people, the way I duel people is I will start the duel with a dedicated all-comers PvP set. Like, I won't actually customize my gear if I can avoid it at all, if at all possible, to fight the enemy dueler, right? And instead, I'll just fight them with just a generic all-comers PvP suit. And the way I punish them, ideally I would be in gear so that they don't even have the option to drop combat from me. I'm just going to murder them, right? But if that's not an option because I'm in the all-comers suit, what I'll be doing is, if they decide that, like a Warlock, for example, if they decide, okay, fuck this, I'm going to fear this Paladin, and then I'm going to run in a straight line away from him, and then I'm going to sit down, I'm going to eat, and I'm going to drink, and we're going to do this over again. Like, they try to get the bubble out of you. If they get the bubble, they go for the full reset, right? Well, if you're allowing me the option to, like, customize my gear to be anti-whatever the fuck you are, anti-mage, anti-shadow priest, anti-rogue, anti-warlock, anti-shaman, anti-hunter, anti-druid, anti-whatever the fuck, don't bitch at me as if you give me the opportunity to customize my gear, and then I customize my gear specifically to fight against you, and now you can no longer win, right? So against a warlock, for example, I would probably click a button that just makes me put on large quantities of shadow resist gear, makes me put on specialist trinkets and items that suddenly allows me to actually kill their ass. Like there might be like some rocket boots all of a sudden coming in there. There might be it might be PvP trinket, mithril insignia time. You know what I mean? Like something that when we tango again, if I'm passing the gear check now with flying colors, like I actually have the gear to kill their ass. And if they are not prepared for that, they're just going to die. Same thing with like against mages and other classes and so forth and so on, right? They're like, oh, I'm going to sheep you. I'm going to run away for a while. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to eat and drink. And I'm going to be like, okay, I'm going to hit this button that makes me super anti whatever the fuck mage you are right now. And this is just kind of how you have to play it in... Well, in a way, you have to do this in Classic WoW as well. They'll bitch at you, especially in duels. But it's kind of the... I think a duel environment where you're starting with a generic suit, like just an all-comer suit, and if they give you the opportunity to swap gear on them, and then you swap gear on them, they have no right to bitch. You know what I mean? It's like, oh no, you're in a 300 resist suit, that's really gay. I'm like, dude, don't give me the opportunity to do this. And you'll notice this, like the best PvPers, or the best duelers in Classic WoW, they won't let you do this. So the difference between an experienced mage and an unexperienced mage is they'll pop you out of sheep far sooner in Classic World of Warcraft because they don't want you popping out of sheep via a heartbeat duration. Because if you pop out of sheep during a heartbeat duration, you can just click a button and just switch into an anti-them suit. And they don't want that to happen, so they'll just won't let it happen. And it makes the duels much more interesting and much more exciting, if that's the case. But anyways, I wanted to showcase to you just how difficult this Paladin actually is to kill. It's virtually unkillable, and for some fucking reason, it's also maintaining metric shit tons of DPS. These DPS numbers actually increase substantially, of course, if you're a like Holy Shock version of the Paladin. But the Holy Shock version of this Paladin has some difficulties. So, for example, there's the version of the Paladin that comes all the way down here and picks up Sanctified Judgment, and then it also gets Holy Shock. That build, if you're not wearing Specialist gear, will actually struggle against Frost Mages, but it'll actually kind of annihilate just about any other 1v1 in the entire game. You just struggle against mages specifically if you don't customize your gear. What am I doing here? No, I know what I'm doing. The other Holy Shock Paladin is kind of interesting. It's significantly less mana efficient. I'm showcasing it right now. I suppose you could go watch the other video and I talk about it at length, so I probably shouldn't do it here. I should just quit. But basically, if you're going up against a mage as a paladin and you don't have improved concentration aura, you need to be in anti-mage specialist gear or you're fucked. Like, the math just says you're absolutely screwed. So, be advised on that one. So, there's going to be a Holy Shock build that comes down here and picks up improved concentration aura. But it's kind of cool because you can pick up Blessing of Sanctuary. So, if you're into your Holy Shock, consider this definitely. Yeah, the Holy Shocks technically do even more DPS than this, and they're even harder to kill. They have more spell power as well, because they end up using 5-piece ornament set. So I think they've got something like 1900 plus healing, whereas the Argent Defender Paladin has to take 4-piece Lamellar, so he has less plus healing and more spell power. But, yeah, no, these Paladins are looking quite deadly. And it all has to do with the fact that our Holy Lights are absolute dog shit for healing. And what this forces us to do is it forces us to get enough plus healing gear to make our FOLs viable. Once our FOLs become viable, the mana efficiency is probably so good. Like, I haven't tested it yet. But the mana efficiency is probably so good on the FOLs that we could start sacrificing on this metric shit ton of MP5. And then we can start getting into other things like more stamina or more whatever the hell you want to survive other types of classes. Resist gear, so forth and so on, right? But as it stands right now, I'm not taking any chances. I'm basically sitting in a metric shit ton of MP5 and then a metric shit ton of plus healing gear and telling everybody to bring it on. As my lines of play become more and more well optimized for dueling in this particular type of gear, I'll probably start sacrificing the MP5. Like, I won't need that much MP5 because I'm being more mana efficient. I know what I'm doing, and so forth and so on. Which means these stats will probably change rather significantly. I'll probably end up picking up more in the way of HP. Like, I'll probably shoot up to like 12k HP, maybe even 13k HP as I start sacrificing the MP5 for stamina. But we'll see. We'll see what I prefer and why. Anyways, Deus Volt, boys, and yeah, that's all I have to say.